He didn't drive to her apartment because he cared about her. Let's be clear about that from the start. He went because she had something he needed, and a man like him doesn't leave loose ends lying around. 2 days before a wedding designed to fuse two criminal empires together, his assistant, the most reliable woman he'd ever met, simply vanished. So he went looking, expecting to find betrayal. Instead, when he finally forced open the door to her crumbling little apartment, the thick smell of blood in the air stopped him cold, and what he found in that freezing, blood-stained room didn't just crack his carefully built world. It made him cancel the wedding entirely. "Stay with me, because this one will get under your skin." The chalk scratched against the wool of Gabriel's trousers, a dry, irritating sound that buzzed straight through to his skin. He stood perfectly still on the velvet-covered pedestal, staring into the gilded mirror. The man looking back at him was someone who had learned to disguise his own brutality behind tailored fabric. The suit was charcoal, cut close to the ribs to hide the bulk of the leather shoulder holster he refused to remove, even for a fitting. "Stop breathing so heavily, Gabriel," came a voice from the leather sofa behind him. The woman didn't even look up from her phone, her thumbs tapping out demands to people whose names she'd never bother to remember. "The break over the shoe has to be perfect. You keep shifting." He didn't answer. He rolled his jaw, feeling the dull ache of a tension headache blooming at the base of his skull. The air in the boutique was thick with lavender oil and old money, and it was suffocating. "The hydrangeas," she said, finally glancing up. Her blonde hair was pulled into a severe knot, and she was beautiful the way a freshly sharpened blade is beautiful. Cold, precise, unyielding. "My mother thinks they look too wild. I told her we're merging shipping operations here, not throwing a carnival. White, silver, black. That's the palette." "Whatever you want, Sloane," Gabriel said, his voice flat. That's all this was. A transaction, a contract sealed in imported silk and 300 guests. He didn't love her. She didn't love him. They understood each other perfectly, which was exactly why the whole thing was supposed to work. But as the tailor pinned the cuff, Gabriel's focus drifted to the empty space beside the changing screen. Nora wasn't there. Nora Quinn had been his assistant for 4 years. She was the buffer between his violent, chaotic reality and the polished corporate front he showed the world. She knew how he took his coffee, black, scalding hot. She knew exactly how much cash to slip the harbor cops to keep them looking the other way. She was a ghost in the machine, a woman of unremarkable height and practical shoes, and an unnerving lack of fear. When rival enforcers had crowded his office the month before, posturing and throwing their weight around, Nora had simply walked through the middle of them carrying a stack of files and politely asked a man twice her size to move his foot so she could vacuum the rug. She was always there, until 48 hours ago. Gabriel stepped off the pedestal. "Mr. Romano," the tailor protested, hands fluttering. "The jacket." "We're done," Gabriel said, shrugging off the unfinished coat and tossing it over a chair. Sloane finally set her phone down, her eyebrows drawing together. "Gabriel, what are you doing? The wedding is in 2 days." "I have a leak," he interrupted, pulling his dress shirt from the rack. "Nora hasn't checked in for 2 days." Sloane let out an elegant little sigh and crossed her legs. "Your secretary? Fire her. Hire someone who understands what's at stake this week. She's probably hungover or fishing for a raise. Let HR deal with it." Gabriel stopped buttoning his cuff. He looked at her, really looked at her. Flawless skin, manicured nails, a life completely insulated from the blood that paid for the ring on her finger. "She's not a secretary," he said, his voice dropping into the quiet, dangerous rasp that made grown men go pale. "She holds the encryption keys to the offshore accounts. She has the physical ledger for the dock payoffs. If she's gone, she's either selling me out or she's dead." "And you think that's a priority right now?" Sloane stood, smoothing her skirt. "My father is flying in tonight. We have the rehearsal dinner. Send one of your thugs to find her." Gabriel strapped the leather holster across his chest, the comforting weight of the pistol pressed against his ribs. I don't send people to handle my liabilities, Sloane. I handle them myself. He walked out before she could reply, the little brass bell over the door chiming a cheerful goodbye. Outside, the sky was a bruised, ugly purple, heavy with the threat of rain. He climbed into the idling black SUV at the curb. His driver, Liam, flicked a cigarette into the gutter and scrambled into his seat. "Where to, boss?" "Garrison Street, the building at the dead end." Liam's hands tightened on the wheel. "Garrison? Boss, that's rival territory. We're not supposed to have boots on the ground there until the ink dries on the marriage certificate. Drive the car, Liam." As the SUV pulled into traffic, Gabriel leaned back and closed his eyes. The irritation in his chest was slowly twisting into something colder, something ugly. He paid Nora a salary that should have bought her a high-rise downtown, a doorman, secure parking. When he'd demanded her address from his head of security an hour ago, he'd stared at the text in disbelief. Garrison Street was a decaying artery of the city, choked with condemned buildings and desperate people. The kind of place where streetlights got shot out for privacy and the police only showed up to collect bodies. Why was she living there? What game was she playing? He thought back to the last time he'd seen her. Tuesday evening, the office empty, Nora standing by the shredder feeding documents into the machine. She'd looked tired. Her skin, usually a healthy cream, had gone sallow, and there'd been a bruise on her jaw, badly hidden under mismatched concealer. When he'd asked, she'd given him a dry, flat smile and blamed a cabinet door. He'd accepted the lie because it was convenient, because he had a wedding to plan. A sharp twist of self-disgust knotted in his gut. He'd ignored every warning sign. And if she'd taken his ledger to his rivals to sabotage the merger, he would have to kill her. The thought sat heavy in his stomach, tasting like ash. He didn't want to kill Nora. He wanted to shake her. He wanted to demand why she'd disrupted his perfectly ordered life. The city shifted as they drove. Glass and steel gave way to crumbling brick and rusted iron. The rain came down harder now, drumming on the roof. Broken glass crunched under the heavy tires. "Pull over here," Gabriel ordered as they reached a row of 4-story buildings that seemed to be leaning against each other for support. "Stay with the car. Keep the engine running." He stepped out into the rain, the cold water soaking through his coat. He didn't run. He walked, deliberate and heavy, toward the entrance. There was no buzzer. The glass in the front door had been smashed and patched with a warped sheet of plywood. He pushed it open, and the hinges screamed. The stench hit him immediately. Boiled cabbage, stale smoke, the sharp chemical bite of bleach, failing to mask something worse. The hallway was narrow, the walls a sickly institutional green peeling away in long strips. A single fluorescent tube buzzed and flickered overhead. He climbed the groaning wooden stairs. The sounds of survival bled through the thin walls. A baby crying. A game show murmuring on a cheap TV. An argument in a language he didn't recognize. A world raw and unpolished. The exact opposite of the one he'd just left. The exact opposite of Sloane. 4th floor. Apartment 4B. The door was heavy, solid oak, oddly out of place in the dilapidated building, though the wood was deeply scratched near the lock. He turned the knob. It didn't catch. The latch was completely broken, the metal casing splintered. He pushed the door open, drawing his weapon in one fluid motion, and stepped inside, sweeping the room with the barrel. The apartment was freezing. Colder inside than out in the rain. No heat at all. He lowered the gun slightly, his brow furrowing. There was no furniture. None. The living room was an empty stretch of scuffed hardwood. No couch, no television, no rug. The only thing in the room was a cheap folding table against the far wall, and on it sat an outdated laptop, a stack of encrypted hard drives, and a neat row of manila folders. His folders. The business. Where was her life? Where was the money? He paid her. "Nora!" he called out. His voice was too loud in the hollow space. No answer, just the rain lashing the glass. He moved deeper in, checking the tiny galley kitchen. The refrigerator was unplugged, its door hanging open on empty wire shelves. The sink was dry. He turned down the short hallway toward the bedroom and bathroom, and then he saw it. Smears of dark, rusty brown on the floor. Not splatters. Drag marks. The trail of someone who couldn't lift their own weight. The metallic smell of copper cut through the damp cold. His pulse kicked against his throat. He followed the trail to the half-open bathroom door and pushed it wide. Nora was on the floor, wedged into the narrow space between the chipped bathtub and the toilet, lit by a single bare bulb. She wasn't dead, but she looked like she'd been trying to be. She wore an oversized grey t-shirt soaked through with sweat and dark blooming stains of blood. Her bare legs were splayed out, a thick bloody towel pressed hard against her left thigh. Her head lolled against the tub. Her skin was the color of old parchment, grey and stretched tight over the bones of her face. The bruise from Tuesday had spread into an ugly sprawl of purple and yellow across half her face. Her lower lip was split. She wasn't holding a phone. She wasn't holding his ledger to sell. She was holding a curved needle, threaded with thick black nylon, her hands shaking so violently she couldn't push it through her own skin. Gabriel froze. For a man who had built an empire on violence, who'd watched men die without his heart rate so much as ticking up, the sight of his quiet, unassuming assistant trying to stitch up her own wound in a freezing, empty bathroom hit him like a physical blow to the chest. He dropped his gun on the edge of the sink. It landed with a heavy clack. Nora's head snapped up. Her eyes, usually so sharp, were glassy and unfocused with fever. She stared at him for a long, agonizing moment. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just let out a dry, rattling breath and dropped her head back against the tub. "You're tracking mud on the floor, boss," she rasped, her voice like crushed glass. Gabriel fell to his knees beside her, the cold of the tile soaking through his expensive trousers, not even registering. He gripped her wrist, gently but firmly prying the needle from her trembling fingers. "What happened?" he demanded, his voice too harsh, cracking the fragile silence. He didn't mean to sound angry, but the panic rising in his chest had nowhere else to go. "Who did this?" "Don't yell at me," Nora whispered, closing her eyes. "I have a headache. Nora, look at me." He grabbed her chin, tilting her face up. Her skin was burning hot. The fever was raging. "Who shot you?" She let out a weak, humorless laugh that dissolved into a cough. "Nobody shot me, Gabriel. Do I look careless? It was a knife, a very big, very ugly knife." He pulled the towel away from her thigh. The wound was deep and jagged. Someone had dragged a blade across the muscle, trying to cripple her. It was weeping, the edges inflamed and angry red. Infection had already set in. "Why didn't you call the syndicate doctor?" he snarled, pressing a cleaner section of towel back against it. She flinched, hissing. "Why didn't you call me? The doctor works for your uncle." She panted, gripping the edge of the tub until her knuckles went white. "And your uncle works for the Kensingtons." Gabriel went perfectly still. The blood rushing in his ears sounded like the ocean. "What did you say?" Nora opened her eyes. The fever was there, but the sharp intelligence that made her indispensable cut right through the haze. She looked at him with a mix of pity and exhaustion. "The merger is a hostile takeover, Gabriel. Sloane's family isn't joining you. They're absorbing you. The hit was supposed to happen at the rehearsal dinner tonight. Poison. Clean. They blame a rival family. Sloane plays the grieving widow and her father takes the docks." She swallowed hard, her throat clicking. "I found the digital trail on Tuesday. Your uncle routed the money to the caterers. I went to intercept the courier carrying the physical proof. Turned out the courier was an enforcer. He was faster than I thought." She gestured weakly to her leg, then her face. "But I got the proof. It's on the hard drive. On the table." Gabriel stared at her. The silence stretched out, heavy and suffocating. He thought of Sloane in the boutique, complaining about flowers while she planned his funeral. He thought of his uncle, kissing him on the cheek at Christmas. And then he looked at Nora, living in a freezing box, bleeding out on cheap linoleum, protecting him. Why? The word was stripped of all his authority. Just a raw, desperate question from a man who'd realized he was standing on quicksand. Why didn't you bring this to me immediately? Why are you living like this? A cynical, tired smile ghosted across her split lip. Because you were picking out suits, Gabriel. You wanted this merger so badly you stopped looking at the shadows. If I'd brought it to you without ironclad proof, you'd have thought I was trying to sabotage the wedding. She looked away, staring at the peeling paint. And I live like this because my mother's care costs $8,000 a month. The facility is nice. They have gardens. A tight, hard knot formed in his throat. He paid her enough to afford that care and a life for herself. But she was sinking every penny into keeping her mother comfortable, choosing to live in squalor so he wouldn't know she was vulnerable, so he wouldn't think she was a liability. Hold still, Gabriel commanded, his voice dropping to a low rumble. He didn't ask permission. He shoved his ruined suit jacket aside, rolled up his sleeves, and opened the pathetic little first aid kit on the toilet seat. He found a bottle of rubbing alcohol. This is going to burn. Just do it, Nora gritted out, grabbing the rim of the tub with both hands. He poured the alcohol directly over the jagged slice. Her back arched, a strangled sound tearing from her throat. She bit down on her own shoulder to keep from screaming, her body trembling violently under his hands. His jaw locked. He felt every tremor pass through her. He threaded the needle with steady, mechanical precision. He'd sewn up his own men before, in basements and back alleys. But this felt different. Every puncture of the needle through her pale skin felt like an indictment of his own blindness. "You're heavy-handed," she gasped, forehead slick with sweat. "You should have let the courier go," he said, focused on pulling the thread tight. "You're an administrator, Nora, not muscle." "I protect my desk," she snapped back, though it lacked heat. "And you sit behind it. You could have died. I'm not dead yet. Stop nagging." He tied off the stitch, snipping the thread, then began wrapping her leg with gauze, pulling it tight enough to stem the bleeding, but gentle enough not to cause more pain. As he worked, he noticed the other marks. A faint silver scar on her collarbone. A burn on her wrist he'd never seen, because she always wore long sleeves. She was a map of quiet, unacknowledged violence. She'd taken the hits meant for his empire, swallowed the pain, and handed him his morning coffee with a blank face. He finished the knot and stayed on his knees, hands resting on her shins, his dark shirt ruined and stained with her blood. From the empty living room, a sharp sound shattered the quiet. A phone buzzing. His burner. The one only 3 people had the number to. He didn't move. He just looked at Nora. "Answer it," she whispered. "It's her. It's almost noon. She'll be asking about the seating chart." He pulled the phone from his pocket. Sloane's name glared on the screen. He hit accept, keeping his eyes locked on Nora. "Where are you?" Sloane's voice was tiny, sharp, impatient. "Liam said you went to the south side. Gabriel, the caterer, is threatening to walk if we don't finalize the risotto." Gabriel stared at the blood drying in the creases of his knuckles. He thought of his uncle. He thought of the poison. "Sloane." His voice was terrifyingly calm, the voice he used right before a room caught fire. "What? And don't use that tone with me. I'm trying to hold this together while you chase a runaway secretary." "Listen to me carefully," he said, watching Nora's eyelids flutter. "There is no risotto. There is no rehearsal dinner. The wedding is cancelled." Silence on the line, a long, stretching void. "Excuse me?" Sloane finally hissed, the facade cracking. "You can't cancel this wedding. Do you have any idea what my father will do? This is a merger." "It's a hostile takeover," he corrected softly. "And your father is about to learn the ports are closed to him. Tell him the courier he sent Tuesday was sloppy. Tell him my assistant sends her regards." A beat. "If I see your uncle or your father in my city by nightfall, I'll sink them in the harbor. Don't call this number again." He didn't wait for a response. He crushed the cheap phone in his hand until the screen spiderwebbed, then tossed it into the dry bathtub. He turned back to Nora. She was smiling, a terrible, bloody, exhausted smile, but a real one. "You ruined the suit," she murmured, eyes sliding shut. "I hated the suit." This time he didn't hesitate. He slid one arm under her knees, the other behind her back, and lifted her off the cold floor, ignoring her weak groan of protest. She weighed nothing. It enraged him all over again, how little space she took up, how easily she carried the weight of his world while starving herself of her own. "Where are we going?" she mumbled, her head falling against his chest. "My house, my doctor. And then, Nora, you're going to tell me exactly how we tear the Kensington family down to the studs." She didn't answer. She'd passed out against his shoulder, her blood soaking into his ruined shirt. He carried her down the dark, reeking stairwell, his boots kicking aside broken glass. He was walking away from his wedding. He was walking straight into a war. And for the first time in months, holding the woman who'd bled to keep him breathing, Gabriel felt completely awake. The ride to his estate was a masterclass in suffocating silence. The SUV tore through the slick streets, taking corners fast enough to throw Nora's unconscious body against his chest. He didn't adjust her. He just clamped his arm tighter around her shoulders, his jaw locked so hard his teeth ground together. The heavy iron gates of his compound parted, and Liam slammed the brakes before the vehicle had fully stopped. "Get Victor!" Gabriel snapped, kicking his door open. "East Wing guest room, 3 minutes ago." He carried her through the cavernous foyer, his boots leaving muddy prints across imported marble. But the curated perfection of the house only made him nauseous. The air smelled of beeswax and expensive filters. Sterile. Dead. He hauled her up the sweeping staircase and into the East Wing suite, laying her in the center of the king-sized bed. The white duvet instantly began drinking up the dark red seeping from her bandaged thigh. Victor, the syndicate's private physician, arrived 2 minutes later, breathless, a heavy leather bag in hand. He stopped dead at the foot of the bed, taking in the blood, the dirt, the bruised and emaciated woman on the Egyptian cotton. "Is that Ms. Quinn?" "Fix her," Gabriel ordered, backing away, his hands hanging useless at his sides. The adrenaline was receding, leaving a cold, jagged hollow in his chest. Victor didn't ask more. He stripped off his jacket, snapped on gloves, and went to work. Gabriel stood by the tall window, forcing himself to watch as Victor cut away the blood-soaked shirt and crude bandages. "Her temperature is 103, Victor muttered, hooking an IV bag to a pole. "Dehydration. Severe exhaustion. The wound is nasty, Gabriel. Whoever did this twisted the blade before they pulled it out. You stopped the bleed well enough, but the infection's already racing through her blood." He paused, looking closer. "When did she last eat?" "Her ribs are practically bruising her from the inside. Her immune system is shot. It's like she's been running on fumes and black coffee for a year." The words landed like a strike. Gabriel looked at Nora's collarbones, sharp under the harsh light. He thought of the catered lunches he expensed to his office, the rich meals he ate while she sat at her desk quietly organizing his empire. He had never once asked if she'd eaten. He'd assumed his money insulated her. He'd assumed wrong. "Pump her full of whatever antibiotics you have," Gabriel said, his voice flat, hiding the tremor in his hands. "If she needs a transfusion, take it from me. I'm O negative." Victor glanced over his shoulder, his eyes sharp. Gabriel Romano did not bleed for his employees. He bled his enemies. But the doctor just nodded. "I'll stabilize her. But she needs real sleep, not passing out from blood loss." A heavy knock came at the door. Liam stood in the frame, holding the hard drives and folders from Garrison Street. "Put them in my study," Gabriel told him. Liam hesitated, glancing at Nora. "Boss, the phones are melting down. Sloane's father just landed. And your Uncle Carlo is asking why security abruptly cancelled the rehearsal dinner. He wants a face-to-face." The guilt in Gabriel's chest crystallized instantly into cold, focused rage. "Tell Carlo I'll meet him," he said softly. "Tell him to come here." The study smelled of aged leather, rain, and gun oil. Gabriel sat behind his massive desk, a rag in one hand, the disassembled slide of his pistol in the other, wiping down the springs with mechanical precision. The hard drives sat in a neat stack by his elbow, an impenetrable wall holding the secrets of his own destruction. He tried every standard bypass code. Nothing worked. Nora had locked them down with an algorithm he couldn't crack. It was 3 a.m, the house silent except for the grandfather clock in the foyer. Then a soft, dragging sound caught his attention. Not the heavy tread of a guard. Friction, fabric against hardwood. He stood, his hand dropping toward his chest, and pulled the study door open. Nora was leaning heavily against the door frame of the guest room at the far end of the hall. A ghost. She wore one of his oversized black shirts, which Victor had clearly put on her after cleaning her up. It fell to her mid-thigh, swimming on her frail frame. Her left leg was heavily bandaged, a brace locking the knee straight. Her right hand gripped the aluminum IV pole, using it as a crutch. She looked wrecked, mottled bruises, tangled hair. But her eyes, staring down the long hallway at him, were violently awake. "Get back in bed," Gabriel ordered. Nora didn't listen. She never really did, he realized. She managed his demands in a way that made him think he was in control. She took a step forward, dragging her stiff leg, the IV wheels squeaking. He swore under his breath and crossed the distance in 5 long strides, stopping in front of her, hands hovering, unsure where to grab her without causing pain. "I said get back in bed, Nora. You're bleeding through the dressing." "I heard cars," she rasped, voice thin and ruined. "Gravel crunching. You sent Liam out." "Liam is pulling the guards from the harbor and putting them on the perimeter here. Now. Bed." "You can't read the drives," she said, ignoring him entirely, leaning all her weight on the pole, knuckles white. She tilted her head back to look up at him. "You don't have the key. You're flying blind, Gabriel." He stared down at her. "I can handle my uncle and the Kensingtons without a spreadsheet." "No, you can't." A spark of genuine irritation finally broke through her exhaustion. Carlo didn't just route the caterers' money. He gave them the layout of the South Armory. He gave them the shift rotations for your personal detail. If you go to war tonight without knowing exactly what he sold them, they'll slaughter your men. Her chest heaved, the effort draining what little color she had. She swayed dangerously on her good leg. Gabriel caught her by the waist, his hand splayed flat across the soft cotton, pulling her flush against his chest. She gasped, her hands flying up to grip his forearms. For a second, neither of them moved. For 4 years, they'd existed in a sterile professional orbit, never touching, never crossing the line of the desk. Now she was pressed against him, burning with fever, her heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "Let me go," she muttered, looking at his chest, refusing to meet his eyes. "You're going to fall." "I'm going to the study," she corrected, her voice tight with a strange defensive panic. "I need my laptop." "You need a hospital." He shifted his grip, intending to pick her up again. Her nails dug into his arms. "Gabriel, please." The word stopped him. She never said please. She organized, she executed, she informed, she didn't beg. He looked at her face, really looked at the raw terror in her eyes. It wasn't fear of the enemy. It was fear of being useless. She'd starved herself and lived in squalor to prove she could carry her own burdens alone. Being helpless, being carried, terrified her more than any bullet. He slowly released her waist, though he kept his hands close. 1 hour, he compromised, his voice a gravelly whisper. You give me the keys, you show me the drops, and then I'm sedating you myself. She offered a ragged, bloody smirk. Deal. He wheeled his desk chair around to the front, refusing to let her walk the extra 5 feet, and dragged over a stool to prop up her injured leg. Nora pulled the laptop toward her, fingers flying. The movements were jerky from the fever and the painkillers, but her muscle memory was flawless. Gabriel stood behind her chair, hands resting on the high leather back, watching lines of code scroll past as she bypassed the first layer of security. "You're shaking," he observed quietly. "Caffeine withdrawal," she lied, teeth chattering. He walked to the wet bar in the corner, poured a finger of whiskey into a crystal glass, and set it beside her. "Drink it. It'll open your blood vessels. Help with the chill." She eyed the amber liquid suspiciously, then threw it back in one gulp, coughing as the burn hit her empty stomach. A faint flush crept into her cheeks. "Okay, I'm in." The screen filled with a massive, heavily indexed spreadsheet. A digital map of his ruin. "Filter by the last 30 days, Gabriel ordered, leaning closer, his chest brushing the back of her chair. She tapped the trackpad. "Here, Carlo initiated 7 transfers from the shell company that handles the dock tariffs. Small amounts under the radar. But look at the routing numbers." "Cayman," Gabriel said, his eyes narrowing. "Her father's preferred bank." "Exactly. But it's not just money. Look at the attached files." She clicked a paperclip icon next to a transaction dated Tuesday morning, the day she vanished. A blueprint filled the screen, the shipping warehouse on Pier 4. Red marks indicated structural weak points, camera blind spots, and the exact location of the breaker box. "That warehouse holds the smuggled munitions," Gabriel said, the temperature in his voice dropping. "If they hit it, the explosion will level 3 city blocks, and the police will pin domestic terrorism on me." "They're not hitting it to blow it up," she corrected, fingers flying. She pulled up an intercepted email. "They're hitting it to steal the munitions. Her father wants your guns to arm his own men for the takeover. The hit is scheduled for 4 a.m. She paused. "Carlo is leading the strike team. He sent an email confirming he has the gate codes." Gabriel looked at the clock. 3:15. The silence in the study was absolute, thick as wet cement. He stared at the name on the screen. Carlo. The man who had taught him to shoot. The man who'd stood at his father's funeral and sworn loyalty to the bloodline. He didn't yell. He didn't smash anything. He just inhaled slowly, the scent of the rain outside filling his lungs, and exhaled a long, cold breath. "He's already there." "Waiting for the trucks to arrive," Nora confirmed, slumping back as the adrenaline crash hit. Her eyelids drooped. "Liam!" Gabriel barked, and the door pushed open instantly, Liam standing there with a shotgun slung across his chest. "Get the men. Suppressed weapons only, no explosives. We go to the docks, and we go quietly. Leave 2 on the perimeter here. No one gets in." Liam vanished. Gabriel opened the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out a sleek, compact pistol. He checked the magazine, racked the slide, and set it on the desk next to Nora's empty glass. She stared at the black metal. "I don't know how to shoot." He pointed at the door. "If anyone opens it who isn't me, you pull the trigger until it clicks empty." He walked around the desk and stood in front of her, his knuckles brushing lightly against her unbruised cheek, still too hot. "Lock the door behind me, do not open it, understand?" She looked up at him, the cynical assistant gone, the woman beneath stripped raw, terrified but present. "Gabriel." He stopped, his hand on the brass knob. "Don't make me plan your funeral," she said, her voice shaking. His lips curved into a dark, genuine smile that didn't reach his eyes, already focused on the violence to come. "I canceled the wedding, Nora. I'm not putting you through a funeral too." He stepped into the hallway, pulling the door shut behind him. He heard the deadbolt slide home with a definitive thunk. The Kensington family thought they were orchestrating a quiet corporate merger. They had no idea they'd just woken the monster. Pier 4 smelled of diesel, rotting kelp, and rusted iron. The rain had slowed to a freezing drizzle, leaving the world slick and coated in a greasy sheen. Gabriel stepped out of the SUV without a sound, easing the door shut until the latch clicked. Liam fell in beside him with the shotgun at low ready. From the shadows of the stacked containers, 6 more of Gabriel's men materialized in flat black, faces hidden by wet collars. Nobody spoke. They'd memorized Nora's blueprints. They knew the blind spots. They knew the angles. 3 trucks coming from the south road, Liam whispered, pressing his earpiece. Empty. Ready to load. Cut the power to the lights, Gabriel said, voice devoid of inflection. When the trucks kill their engines, we move. No survivors on their side. A heavy clunk echoed as the breaker was thrown. The towering security lights died, plunging the pier into suffocating darkness, the only glow the sickly orange of the city skyline bouncing off the clouds. Gabriel drew his pistol, the metal ice cold against his palm, and slid between 2 stacks of containers. The box trucks rolled through the main gate, headlights cut, arrogant, certain they had the keys to the castle. They parked in a neat row before Warehouse 7, its roll-up door already open, and standing just inside the threshold, lit by a single flashlight, was Carlo. Gabriel stopped in the shadow of a rusted crane, watching his uncle pull a silver flask from his coat and take a long drink. Carlo looked relaxed, like a man who'd just secured his retirement. 3 enforcers hopped out of the lead truck, big men with unsuppressed rifles, moving with the sloppy confidence of a crew expecting no resistance. "You got the codes for the inner vault, Carlo?" the lead one asked. "Already punched in," Carlo replied, wiping his mouth. "Make it quick. Gabriel's busy looking for his missing secretary. He won't notice the armory's empty until tomorrow afternoon." Gabriel stepped out of the shadows. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He just walked into the open yard, gravel crunching softly beneath his boots. Carlo saw him first. The older man's hand froze mid-air, the flask slipping from his grip and clattering against the concrete. "Gabriel!" The 3 enforcers spun, raising their rifles. They never got to pull the triggers. From atop the containers, Liam and the team opened fire, suppressed weapons coughing like heavy staple guns. The first dropped instantly. The second took 2 to the chest and folded over the hood of a truck. The third got off one wild, deafening shot into the sky before a shotgun took out his knees and a final quiet pistol shot ended it. The silence that followed rang in Gabriel's ears. Carlo was backed against the metal wall, hands raised, shaking. "Gabriel, wait! It's not what you think! They forced me. Sloane's father threatened my daughters. He said he'd kill your cousins if I didn't give him the warehouse." Gabriel stopped 10 feet away, looking at the man who'd bought him his first bicycle, the man who'd poured whiskey on his father's grave. "You don't have daughters, Carlo," he said quietly. "You have 2 ex-wives who hate you and a gambling debt that maxed out at $3 million on Monday." Carlo's mouth opened, but no sound came. The lie died in his throat. "You sold my life and the lives of my men to cover a bad streak at the tables," Gabriel continued. He didn't feel angry. He felt nothing at all, a terrifying hollow void. "You used a Kensington courier to hide the trail, but you were sloppy. My assistant found you. A secretary?" Carlo spat, a desperate, ugly sneer twisting his face as he realized begging wouldn't work. "You're going to burn your own blood for a glorified typist?" "She isn't a typist," Gabriel said. He raised the pistol, locking his elbow. "She's the woman who just ended your life." He squeezed the trigger twice. Carlo slid down the wall, leaving a dark smear, gasped once and went still, eyes staring up at the rain. Gabriel lowered the gun, the smell of gunpowder mixing with the salt water. He stood over the body for a long minute, letting the cold rain wash over his face. "The trucks are secure, boss," Liam said quietly. "No one else is coming. Load the bodies into the back of their trucks. Drive them to the airstrip. Park them right in front of her father's jet. Leave the keys in the ignition." He paused, looking down at the silver flask in the puddle of brandy, and put Carlo in the driver's seat. "Let her father see exactly what happens to his investments." He walked back to the SUV. The adrenaline was draining out, leaving a deep, aching exhaustion. He slid behind the wheel, turned the key, and drove away from the docks without looking back, heading toward the only person in his entire empire who had actually protected him. The drive back felt endless. When he walked into the lemon-scented foyer, the luxury turned his stomach. The real world was the freezing bathroom on Garrison Street. He walked to the study door. The knob didn't turn. The deadbolt was thrown. He leaned his forehead against the cool wood, a tight knot forming in his throat. She'd listened to him. "Nora," he said softly. A stool scraped across the floor inside. The deadbolt snicked back. The door cracked, then swung wide. She was slumped against the frame, swallowed by his black shirt, the pistol dangling from her right hand, finger flat outside the trigger guard, but her grip white-knuckled. He stepped in, kicking the door shut, gently wrapped his hand around the barrel, eased it from her fingers, engaged the safety, and tossed it onto the sofa. "You didn't shoot me." "You knocked," she whispered, scanning his ruined shirt, the dark stains on his cuffs. "Did you? Carlo is dead. The Kensingtons leave tomorrow." She closed her eyes, and the tension snapping out of her shoulders took her balance with it. Her good leg buckled. He caught her mid-collapse, scooping her against his chest. She didn't fight him. She just rested her bruised cheek against his damp shoulder. He carried her past the desk, past the laptop still glowing with his uncle's ruined empire, and straight into his own master suite, bypassing the guest room entirely. The room was warm, heated by a stone fireplace. He laid her in the center of the massive bed. "I need to wash," he said, staring at his stained hands. "Don't move." "Can't feel my leg anyway," she murmured. He showered the docks and the gunpowder and his uncle's memory away, watching pink water swirl down the drain. He pulled on dark trousers and walked back in, bare-chested. She was staring at the ceiling. He sat on the edge of the mattress. "Victor said you need sleep." "My brain won't shut off," she replied, rolling her head to look at his chest, the syndicate ink, the pale scars. "What happens tomorrow?" I explained the new terms of existence to her father. "Sloan was a strategic alliance," she said, voice thin but stubborn. "If you cut the Kensingtons off, you lose 20% of your gross margin." He let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh and leaned over, bracing his hands on the mattress beside her shoulders. "I just dismantled a hostile takeover, executed my own blood, and carried you out of a slum. And you're quoting margins at me. Someone has to keep the books balanced." "I was blind without you," he corrected softly. The professional distance they'd maintained for 4 years vanished. He brushed his thumb gently along her jaw. "Your mother's facility is fully funded through my private trust. The Garrison Street apartment is done. Liam is packing your things, and then he's burning that building to the ground." Her lips parted. "You can't just mandate my life." "I just did." He leaned closer, smelling the antiseptic on her skin. "You bled for me. You are never going back to a desk outside my door. You're staying in this room." She swallowed hard. "I'm your assistant." "No," he whispered, the desperate need in his chest settling into a cold, possessive certainty. "You're my partner. And if anyone ever looks at you sideways again, I'll tear their eyes out." Nora looked at the man who'd orchestrated a slaughter, looking at her like she anchored him to the earth. She let out a long, slow breath, her pragmatic walls finally falling. "I prefer the wild mushroom over the truffle risotto anyway," she mumbled, her heavy eyelids sliding shut. His chest hitched with a quiet, genuine laugh. He pulled the dark linen sheets over her shoulders. And he didn't leave. He lay down on top of the covers beside her, watching the shadows on the ceiling, listening to her breathe. The next morning, sunlight cut through the tall windows like a blade. Gabriel was already awake, by the window in a fresh white shirt, sleeves rolled up, black coffee in one hand, a new burner phone in the other. It was 8 a.m. when the phone buzzed. A Boston area code. He took a slow sip and hit accept. "Gabriel." The voice that boomed through wasn't the smooth, arrogant tone of a patriarch planning a takeover. It was tight. The sound of a man who'd just looked into the back of a box truck and seen his own mortality. "What have you done?" "I returned your property, Richard," Gabriel said, smooth, carrying no malice, only absolute authority. "I hope the flight back was comfortable. You murdered Carlo. You slaughtered my men. This is an act of war. This is an eviction notice, Gabriel corrected. He turned, looking at the bed. Nora was still asleep, breathing deep and even, the fever broken in the night, the dark bruising stark against the white pillows. A reminder of the price she'd paid. His eyes hardened. Listen carefully, Richard. The merger is dead. Sloan is free to pursue other arrangements. But if your people try to move product through my ports, if your trucks cross the city line, if I so much as smell one of your men in my territory, I won't send the bodies back next time. I'll bring them to your front door myself. You can't run the shipping lines without my capital. You'll bleed out in 6 months. I have better accountants than you think, Gabriel said, his gaze fixed softly on Nora. Don't call me again. He hung up and dropped the phone in his pocket. From the bed, a soft rustle of linen. Nora shifted, wincing as the movement pulled at her stitches, and opened her eyes, blinking against the light. She took in the unfamiliar room, then him. Did you shoot the phone? She asked, voice raspy with sleep. I handled Richard. He walked over and set his coffee on the nightstand. She pushed herself up against the headboard, looking down at the oversized shirt, the brace on her leg. The memories came rushing back. The freezing bathroom, the needle, the chaotic ride, the intense promise he'd made. She looked up at him, and he was watching her with quiet, intense focus. Not the polished, unapproachable boss this morning. The man who'd knelt in her blood. So, she said, clearing her throat, reaching for professional footing. The Kensington network is out. We'll have to restructure the offshore accounts by Tuesday, or the shell companies will flag the authorities. Gabriel leaned over, bracing his hands on the mattress on either side of her hips, trapping her. The scent of soap and coffee enveloped her. Stop. I'm just saying, if we don't pivot, Nora, look at me. She stopped, met his eyes, dark and deep and stripped of the corporate mask. Your laptop is locked in the study. You're not touching a spreadsheet for 2 weeks. Victor comes back at noon to check your stitches and start you on a proper diet. You're going to rest. I don't do well with resting, she muttered, a faint flush creeping into her cheeks at his closeness. I'll get bored. Then I'll entertain you, he replied, voice dropping to a low, rough register that sent a shiver down her spine. But you're not working, you're healing. She looked at the heavy watch on his wrist, then the faint scars on his knuckles. She'd spent 4 years organizing this man's life, anticipating his needs, cleaning up his messes, thinking she was invisible to him, just a ghost in the machine. She raised a trembling hand and rested her palm flat against the center of his chest, right over his heart. She could feel the steady, powerful rhythm beneath his shirt. You canceled a multi-million-dollar wedding for me, she said quietly, stating it not as a question but as a terrifying fact she was finally accepting. I canceled a business transaction, he corrected, his hand coming up to cover hers, pressing her palm tighter to his chest. I burned down a slum for you. I executed my uncle for you. I would have burned the whole city to the ground if I hadn't found you in time. She stared at him, the cynical walls she'd built around her heart cracking and falling away. There was no fairy tale here. He was a violent, dangerous man, and she was the woman who kept his ledgers. Their hands were both stained with blood. But in the cold, brutal light of their world, it was the truest form of devotion she had ever seen. Okay, she whispered, her fingers curling into his shirt. Okay, Gabriel. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. He leaned down and pressed his lips softly against her forehead, lingering there. A silent, absolute vow of protection. The game was over. The desk was gone. Nora Quinn was no longer the assistant in the shadows. She was the queen of the board, and Gabriel was never going to let her fall again. So here's what I keep turning over in my head. We always think the dangerous one in a story like this is the man with the gun. But the truth is, the most dangerous person in this whole thing was the quiet woman at the desk who saw everything, said nothing, and held an entire empire together while nobody bothered to look at her twice. That's the real twist, isn't it? The power was never where everyone assumed it was, and it makes you wonder, how many times do we underestimate the steady, quiet person in the room, the The one who just gets things done without ever asking for credit. Gabriel almost lost everything because he stopped looking at the one person who'd never stopped looking out for him. It took a freezing bathroom and a self-stitched wound to finally open his eyes. So tell me, what was your favorite moment? Was it the second he kicked in that door and the whole world tilted? The conversation in the study where she refused to back down even half dead with fever? Or the showdown at the docks when he finally chose loyalty over blood? Drop it in the comments because I genuinely read every single one and I love hearing which beats hit hardest for you. And if this story pulled you in, if you felt that slow burn of two people who finally saw each other clearly, then do me a favor and hit that like button. It really does help the channel more than you know. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one, because I've got plenty more dark, twisty, slow burn stories coming your way. Until next time, take care of yourselves and remember, never underestimate the quiet ones.